Good evening. We'll call this January 18th, 2022 meeting of the Williamson County School Board to order. Board members, will you please record your attendance? Mr. Wimberly, are you here?
I am here.
Thank you. Mr. Wimberly is joining us electronically this evening. Everyone, if you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence, I'd like to ask our deputies, Deputy Hooper and Purcell, to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. You may be seated. The next item on our agenda is items of particular public interest, which is our public comment portion of the evening. And I'm going to read out the rules for public comment. But before I do, I would like to welcome two Boy Scout troops to our meeting. The first troop is Troop 8 out of Brentwood. Robert Best is the troop leader. And the second is Troop 55 out of Grassland, and Bart Lowe is the leader. So thank you all for being here tonight. Okay, we have 4 people signed up for public comment tonight, and you will all have 3 minutes. So while I'm reading these rules, you may want to set your phone timers or whatever timing device you use. Let me just go ahead and read to you. Public comment is one of several ways that the board hears from constituents. Other avenues include emails, phone calls, and in-person meetings. Per board policy, 30 minutes will be placed on the agenda for the chair to recognize individuals to make comments. At the discretion of the chair, this time may be extended. School board members do not respond to public comment during a meeting. Williamson County residents and WCS employees shall have first priority. In the event time remains, the chair may allow non-residents to speak. All persons addressing the board will state his or her name, provide his or her address, and that is provided via the sign-up process, and provide the name of the organization or group he or she represents before addressing the board. The board reserves the right to limit the time of any speaker. The chair shall have the authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who is disruptive or does not adhere to board rules. Speakers will present their comments from the podium. The school board expects that each speaker will be courteous, modeling for our students how one can respectfully disagree with others' views. Speakers will address their comments to the entire school board and not to one individual board member, the superintendent, a staff member, or the audience. Speakers are not permitted to use vulgar language. No yelling, speaking out, or clapping is allowed as a person speaks, including while members of the board or staff are speaking. Remarks of any individual who is disruptive or does not adhere to the rules shall be terminated by the chair. Disrupting individuals will be asked to leave on first instance and will be escorted out by a deputy. No signs are allowed in the audience. So I'll now start calling you up. Our board vice chair, Casey Haw, is the timekeeper. Casey, if you'll raise your hand. And Mr. Haw, I'll turn your microphone on so you can clearly give the signal when time is nigh. So he'll let you know when your time is up. And if you would like to be escorted out by a deputy, please approach one of the deputies and let him know. These deputies will be happy to assist you. So our first speaker tonight is Marla Peterson. Marla Peterson. Okay. I don't think she's here at this time. Ms. Osbrooks, if you'll remind me, I'll call her name at the end as well. Our second speaker is Jared Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan.
Hello. My name is Jared Sullivan. I was a Franklin High School student body president in 2009. I am now an author for Random House. Last meeting, several parents called for removing books from high school libraries, which I feel warrants a response, which is why I'm here. Because in attacking books, these parents greatly insult our students' intellect. Let's not pretend that students cannot understand the nuances of difficult material. One parent mentioned the book Crank, which contains scenes of drug abuse, some of which are repellent. That's the point. You'd have to be dense to think this novel would encourage readers to try drugs. Even if that weren't the case, our students deserve the chance to engage with books that challenge their sensibilities and ethics, because that's what they have to do every day as a thinking person in this country. More important, our students have First Amendment rights that no one should infringe upon. Most high school juniors and seniors are old enough to be drafted and fight for this country. If they can do that, they can certainly handle some ink on paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Miller.
Good evening. I'm Mike Miller. I only prepared for a minute, so this is not going to take the full 3. Let me start by thanking Mayor Anderson and the Commission for recommending a 3% salary increase for our salaried teachers. I urge this board to unanimously approve this motion tonight. Throughout my older son's journey in WCS, he's been blessed, really, with an amazing array of general and special education teachers who have devoted tireless energy and worked together to implement novel techniques to help him. Immeasurable credit is due them for his ongoing success in middle school. At Thursday night's work session, it was noted that the greatest number of teachers leaving our district right now are those with 0 to 6 years of experience, some of our younger tenured teachers, many of those for other districts and private schools. We struggle also, it was noted, to attract the same group to apply. A healthy student-to-teacher ratio is absolutely essential for special education success. We need to attract and retain more of these teachers. More investment is required to maintain our excellence in public education and special education in particular. Even after that 3% raise, salary for our new teachers will still lag our neighbor to the north by about 10%. Salary is but one factor. I do want to make that important note. We must also make WCS a place where teachers want to teach again. So let's all calm the voices in the room, and as parents, partner with our teachers and our schools instead of tearing them down. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Adrienne King.
Hello, I'm Adrienne King. I am the parent of 2 current Page High students. I'm a Franklin High School graduate myself. I'm here to advocate for our teachers, librarians, school staff, and administrators. The vast majority in our community are very thankful for the people who work in our schools, and teachers don't hear that enough. I'm here to speak for the 3% pay increase and remind you it's only a start. There are squeaky voices in our community who seek to feed an outrage machine, and some members of this board have fallen hard for that narrative. Any parent advocating for parental choice over the greater good for all students detracts from the mission of our public education system. I am here to ask tonight that the school board stop catering to that loud minority. The potential for success for our system is unlimited if we all work together and set a proactive agenda. If we continue to allow those seeking social media fame to set our agenda, we will be stuck in this current cycle forever. Thank you.
Thank you. And Marla Peterson. I don't think Ms. Peterson is here. That concludes our public comment for the night. We'll be moving on now to the approval of the agenda. Board members, is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
Motion to approve.
Mr. Welch makes the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Cleveland seconds. Is there any discussion about this agenda? If there's no discussion, we'll move to vote. Mr. Wimberly, how do you vote?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, board members. The next item is approval of the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Mitchell makes the motion to approve. Mr. Ha makes the second. Board, is there any discussion? I don't see anyone wanting to proceed with discussion. Board members, please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, board members. With that vote, you approve the November 15th, 2021 school board meeting minutes. You approve the following board policies for second reading: student wellness and the virtual education program. You've also approved the recommendation for field trip fee requests and the annual review of board policies, which is an annual agenda item. Our next item on the agenda is communications to the board, and the first one of these items is our superintendent's report from Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank everyone for their participation and presence here tonight, especially the scouts working on their badges. And I certainly encourage them to get as many badges as they possibly can as they go through this good process that the Boy Scouts have. Did want to give you a quick report and summary of our discussion back on Thursday, where we spent a substantial amount of time talking in my superintendent's report. We mentioned COVID, and we bragged a little bit on our students' ACT scores the previous year. And I mentioned one particular goal of mine to improve student sense of safety at school and the particular action steps we were taking towards that administratively this year, which includes standardizing our teacher handbooks and our student handbooks, and how we address discipline across all our schools, especially with respect to bullying and harassment. And then finally, we talked about library books and selection, and we had a really good presentation from a couple of our secondary school librarians about the process they go through. So I really encourage folks to go back if they'd like to and review that discussion. Finally, I do want to mention to you weather. As many of you know, I think, unless you've been under the proverbial rock, you know that it snowed, and we were not able to have on-campus school today. We have used 3 of our 10 stockpiled school days for weather. We've let everyone know that we do plan to be on campus tomorrow morning based on how the roads cleared up. But I have to emphasize, the roads are not perfect. There will be some icy spots here and there, especially in those shaded areas. So just like always, we encourage folks to be careful with that. And in part because we spent so much time in the superintendent's report at our work session, knowing that we have a number of significant items on the agenda tonight, I do want to jump to student, staff, and school spotlights. And Madam Chair, if I'm not mistaken, we have somewhere around 30 celebrations tonight in our student spotlights.
And Mr. Golden, that means just 30 plus slides. We are really celebrating some students and staff tonight. So sit back and enjoy all of these fine students. We're going to start with perfect ACT composite scores. And this is Jackson Peppercorn from Centennial High School. And this is Zachary Bubb from Franklin. And Lillian Shee from Franklin as well, and also from Franklin, Russell Warzetsky, perfect ACT composite scores. Now, we are really celebrating the arts this evening, and we are recognizing our members of our all-state band from a number of schools, And this is through the Middle Tennessee School Band and Orchestra Association. We're going to start over at Brentwood High School. This is Atlas Stallings and Rena Shue. Their directors are Andrew O'Keefe and Katiana Nicholson. At Centennial High School, this is Colin Miller. Colin's director is Scott Miller. At Franklin High School, Rachel Collins, Vasilios Kanagla, Judy Shue, Jessica Wong, Renaz Jamal, Sam got ahead of myself, Lucas Varden, and November Varden. Jacob Campost is their director. Also, All-State Band from Nolensville High School. Lamik Shmazini, Casey Martins, and Nathan Montpool. Benjamin Easley, their band director. At Page High School, Caden Monk, Taylor Kohlmeyer is the band director there. At Ravenwood High School, Emily Barnes, Chris Januak, and Robert Fay, band director. At Summit, Dorothy Burt was named to the All-State Band, Eric Harris and Scott Atchley, band director. Now we're going to talk about All-State Orchestra. We're going to start at Brentwood High School. We had 21 students named to the All-State Orchestra. Andrew Gann, Joanne Kang, Daniel Alopade, then Amy Shue, and Brian Shue, Andrew O'Keefe, their orchestra director. At Centennial High School, this is Pretson Kitsavan. Allison Cowan is the orchestra director there. At Franklin High School, Marcus Chin, Dylan Cook, and Chloe Robinson. Ross Bader is the orchestra director. At Nolensville High School, Ella Goggins, Anna Mandrell, Kerrigan Mandrell, and Ethan O. Craig Maddole is their orchestra director. At Ravenwood High School, Caitlin Castleberry, Saru Chakraborty, Luke Hernandez Palmer, Ash Wong, Alice Coe, Megan Lowe, Diana Liu, and Mitchell Liu. Ross Bader, their orchestra director. All-State Choir, we had about 31 students named to the All-State Choir from Brentwood High School. Sam Holt, Adeline Spears, Kate Smith, Andrew Stallworth, Olivia Weber, Alexander Wilson, Natalie Pratt is their choral director. At Centennial High School, Helena Erdens, Merritt Hayman, Colin Miller, Riley Tuttle, Kyle Varenkamp, and Nicole Varenkamp. Jonathan Vest, their choir director. At Franklin High School, Aisha Henshaw, Adeline Sexton, and Molly Boker. Angela Beal is their choir director. At Independence High School, Emily Doverpool, Michael Gordy, Caden Smith, and Wyatt Wheatley, and Julie Schwartz is their choir director. At Nolensville High School, Jeremy Steinman and Isabella Wickham. Cassidy Lindstrom is their choir director. And Ravenwood High School, Claire Dahl, Faith Dengett, Ann Dickerson, Evan Doglovic, Kyle Doglovic, Sterling Jones, Caroline Meyer, Ella Miller, Emily Miller, Natalie Porter, Benjamin Segmiller, Levi Segmiller, and Grady Vanilevskis. Rose Helmers is their choir director. And last but not least, from Summit High School, Logan Benton, Grace Greenman, and Trevor Young, Jenna Ellsbury is their choir director. And right back from competition in Atlanta, Georgia over the weekend, this is your Mill Creek Middle Theater team who brought home the Junior Theater Festival Excellence in Music Award. Allie Eisen is their drama director. This is Claire Street, and Claire won the Inspiration Award from this national festival. And this is Lainey Allred and Will Brown, and they were given All-Star Awards from the Junior Theater Festival. Again, Allie Isom is their theater director. Now, it's been a minute since this award, but this is your Tennessee Titans Mr. Football for Division I 6A from Summit High School, Destin Wade. His coach is Brian Coleman, and you may recall that Destin will be playing college ball at the University of Kentucky with his brother, Keaton. And for some staff spotlights from Kenrose Elementary School. This is our opportunity to celebrate Virginia Nix, who is the wonderful art teacher there. And she has been named the Tennessee Art Education Association Art Teacher of the Year. And last, but certainly not least, is our wonderful Maria Griego, who received the Special Educator Award from the Tennessee Association for Administration in Special Education. Woo, it's a lot of them, but how fun is it to celebrate all of our students and staff? Congratulations.
Thank you, Ms. Birdsong. That is a lot of celebrating. Congratulations to all of our students and staff. A quick board chair report. Board members, remember to file your disclosure of interest filings. The deadline is January 31st. That is a state legal requirement. And then also another state legal requirement, make sure that you are current on your required trainings through the Tennessee School Board Association. It's always good to keep up with that as well. Those trainings, happen throughout the year, and a lot of times you have to balance your day job with those trainings which occurred during the workday. I want to also just note that there are still volunteer opportunities in all of our schools. One of the easiest to fit in with your day job is volunteering in the cafeteria. It's, that lots of the schools have 2 shifts set up. Some of the schools just have 1 shift set up, but it's a great opportunity to be in the school and to see the students, and also to really be in touch with why we do this work. So I'd encourage you to look at your volunteer opportunities and take advantage of those. Also, effective January 1st, we did have the every decade redistricting. And so you may have some new schools that are in, your district may have changed. You may have some new schools in your district. So please make sure that you look at that and introduce yourselves to your new principals and your new parent leaders at those schools. And then finally, Ms. Cleveland, do you have anything to report from the Legislative Committee?
There is one bill that we're keeping an eye on. Excuse me. It's Senate Bill 1674. It's the Tennessee Education Account, which we all know is school vouchers. And this bill adds an option by which the students can meet the eligibility requirement for program participation at any time during the 3-year period immediately preceding September 1st, 2025, which means it's going to begin in September 1, 2022, should it pass. And one of the additions is the school district did not offer students 180 days of in-person learning for a school year due to the COVID-19 pandemic, or voluntarily imposed a mask mandate in response to COVID-19 that voluntarily refused to allow parents and guardians to opt their students out of the mask mandate. So we're watching this one closely, and right now this is to be placed on the Senate Education Committee calendar for January 19th. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. And Mr. Galbraith, I believe you have a hand up here.
Thank you. Jason, I thought we had a discussion, and we've talked about this a bunch. Just wanted to clarify with regards to recognizing students and spotlights and state champions. I thought we were going to start including the club sports that are school-based club sports, and so I know there were several. I don't want to attempt to name them, and so if that is the case, if we could add those to next month's agenda.
Thank you. That is our plan to do that. We'll make sure we celebrate those students as well. Obviously, well, to me, the more students we can celebrate, the better.
Right, yeah.
Right. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And-
And are we going to?
Oop.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
And I don't, were we going to ask any questions? Because I wanted to pass along a piece of information that I got from Dave that was relevant to your discussion of the library discussion from last week. And a question was asked about the history, if a parent could look at the history of a child's library books, and it was discovered that was off. They turned it on today and been verified that parent can go into the child's Follett account, can go in and sign in through their email address or their login information, and they can see their history now. So I think that's retroactive.
Thank you for mentioning that. Our system does allow for parents to access their student selection of library books, and to your point, yes, it is on, and it was not on Thursday, and so thank you for pointing that out. Also, Madam Chair, I do want to mention one additional piece related to that. Our board policy 4.403, if I've named that correctly, reconsideration of instructional materials does include library books as well, and I just want to make sure that we specified that.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if your presentation is complete, I don't really have a point of privilege, but I'm going to try one if I may.
Please go ahead.
Board members, next week is actually the National School Board Member Appreciation Week. And I wanted to make sure that you all knew that we appreciate you. We do have some mug with the proverbial swag in front of you as a thank you. It's, school board work is one of those unsung important works in our community and really in this nation. And I want to thank you for your work.
Thank you very much. And these will definitely come in handy for some of those 5 or 6 hour work sessions. So
You may need a pencil sharpener for something in the mug. I don't know.
Thanks. I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break here, Tim and Brian. And Deputy Purcell, could I see you for a second, please? Thank you. Turn all these on. We'll return to new business now. The first items under new business are approval of the 2021-22 school board budget amendments and resolutions. And the first of these is the General Purpose School Fund Amendment for disproportionality ARP idea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a transfer from Federal Projects Fund to the General Fund for the disproportionality IDEA funding, which, if I'm not mistaken, is our third year of 3 years prior to review. Recommend approval.
Have a staff recommendation for approval. Is there a motion to approve? Yes, Ms. Apria, is there a second? Mr. Brown? Is there any discussion? I see no one requesting to speak. Board members, will you please cast your votes? Mr. Wimberly, how do you vote, please?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, board members. The next item is the General Purpose School Fund Amendment, Middle School STEM and CTE grant. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a grant that we've received. I want to thank our college and career technical education folks for this, to allow for middle school students to explore those opportunities in CCTE prior to reaching high school, and we recommend approval.
Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Mitchell makes the motion. Mr. Hall makes the second. Board members, any discussion? I see no discussion. Please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, board members. The next item is the General Purpose School Fund Resolution for additional staffing. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a proposal we usually bring to you sometime around this time of year based on additional growth positions. This year we have 33.9 teacher positions plus 11 special education positions that we are proposing that you add based on actual growth. This will put those positions in the appropriate categories, and we do recommend approval for that.
Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Apria makes the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Cleveland seconds. Board members, any discussion? Mr. Galbraith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, is this 3.4 million, does that represent the entire year's worth of, is that 12 months of salary for these 40 people?
Thank you for that. It is actually, it is based upon our projection of when they were hired. So for many of them, it's going to be close to that. And I'm looking over at Ms. Farmer to give a specific answer to that.
Yes, for budgeting purposes, it would be an entire year's worth of salary put in.
Sorry, I did not understand that.
Most, as Mr. Golden said, most of these hires did occur August, September.
And so these are hires that we've already made, all of them. So these are fully staffed, even though we've got some unfilled positions. These are staffed. So we've gone ahead and done this, and because we're not going negative, and we're not spending more money than we have in our budget. But then we go and figure out how many we need. We kind of add it to the budget now.
That's correct.
That's correct. And to use my thinking of the term, although I'm not an accountant, we are booking it.
Yes.
If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's fine. Okay, thank you. I for some reason I did not understand that Thursday. Thank you.
I see no further discussion. Board members, please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you. Our next item is the General Purpose School Fund resolution for a raise. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor Anderson and I have for the last few months been talking in pretty good detail about the quickly changing market conditions that we and so many businesses have experienced with staffing. He worked with his staff and let the county budget committee know at their most recent meeting that in February he intended to make a recommendation to them to increase county government staff's pay by $1 an hour. As I understand it, that comes out to somewhere around 4% of their total county expenditures. Plus, he mentioned that the proposal was to increase the sheriff's department and emergency management staff by 6%, with a proposal to come in February. He also encouraged us to do the same with what we could do with the funding that we currently had. Based upon that, we did a lot of work the last few weeks, had some discussions with the Williamson County Education Association about teacher pay, and did some study. And we are bringing to you a proposal to increase our hourly employees' pay by $1 an hour. This will include part-time and full-time employees, that everyone will get that $1 an hour pay raise upon approval, and that we increase the teacher's salary by 3%. I want to point out, and I've mentioned this before, but I think the more times we talk about it, the better. This is extremely unusual in the middle of a budget year. It is hard to make a change for a government entity in the middle of a budget year. Largely, one of the reasons we're able to do this is because our sales tax revenue, really just those first few months of this year, exceeded what we had budgeted for this year. In other words, folks are confident in their spending money, and the sales tax revenue has made this possible. So from a process standpoint, if you all approve it tonight, it will go on the county commission's agenda. And as I understand it, it will accompany as a separate item whatever proposal the county actually puts on the books. And this will need to be approved by the county commission in February. Our proposal would make this retroactive to the first February pay period, but because of the schedule, it would first be realized in a paycheck on February 28th. So I felt like it was important to walk through that detail. We're very pleased that we're able to do it, and we hope that our staff recognizes that we're doing what we can within the funding that we have to make a difference for them. So I recommend approval.
Board members, do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Mitchell makes the motion. Ms. Apria makes the second. Is there any discussion? Mr. Galbraith.
Thank you. I think everybody is in agreement that we are. I can't speak for everybody. I'm completely in agreement that we want to take every opportunity to get the teachers the pay they need and to get us the funding that we need. I think that's part of our role as board members to advocate for that. Jason, I know you talked about this being extraordinary, and it's something that we're doing in the mid-year, and I really don't take that lightly. I just want to be 100% certain, and I'm not 100% certain that we've looked at all of the potential fiscal responsibility and fiscal things that could go wrong that could put us in a tough spot come next budget year. And so I just wanted to, and thank you, Rachel, for answering all of my questions. Welcome to that. And you had your first budget last year, but I typically do this when it comes to making pretty big financial decisions, and making them in no fault of timing on our own. This is brought forth by the mayor, and we need to respond, and I think it's appropriate. But just a couple of questions, Jason. From when you do we know what percentage increase the the raise, the dollar an hour is overall on the hourly wages?
Well, number one, it's more than 3%.
Right.
And so for 3%, for a dollar to be 3%, you're talking about $33+ an hour. And I don't know the total average percent on hourly, but I'm looking over to Rachel. I think she may have an estimate of that.
I can't actually tell you the exact percentage. I can tell you the overall cost and of what it would be for us, and roughly, it depends. The chart varies greatly, and so
Right.
that's the hard part.
Well, I'm just trying to, maybe if we knew the average pay of a classified employee, it might tell it. But I'm trying to compare the 6% for the sheriff's department to our hourly employees, and I want to show that we're getting pretty close there. Like I don't want anybody to think that the $1 an hour is less than the 3%, because it's much more.
It's more.
Right. It just doesn't, I mean, it might not equate that in everybody's mind to that. But so because you quoted the 6% on the sheriffs, and they're on, but I don't know if they're all on hourly basis or not, but is it close to 6, do you think?
So let me give you one example that really hits one of our toughest spots. You may recall that a few months ago, you all voted to increase the base amount for a special education teacher's assistant to $15 an hour. A $1 an hour raise is 6.7% pay increase. So we do have some staff members who make less than that per hour. As an example, our general education teacher's assistants make less than that. So their average their pay will go up some amount more than
Right.
that 6.7. So somewhere around that $15 an hour point is the point at which they're actually going to be making more than that 6%.
Gotcha. Okay. So to that end, on just as a frame of reference, those special education teachers who we gave a raise in the fall, it's a little under 7%, 6.5%. Something like that.
That's right. For that 0 to 5 years experience, and some of those special education teachers who have a little bit more experience,
It's a little bit less.
the percentage might be a tiny
Right.
bit less.
Okay. And so Mr. Welch had a question on Thursday regarding the sales tax, and whether or not we're getting our share of the online sales tax, and I started thinking about it after the fact, and the fact that our sales tax, you said, was up 30% or so year over year, and I'm trying to understand. It seems to me that, like, maybe there's pockets, maybe there's a specific sales tax item or from some type of vendors that's not being included, but I can't fathom that we have a 30% increase without accounting for online sales tax in this economy, and this knowing how much I spent on Amazon this year, right? So what's your understanding, and if that's not it, then some other thing is causing us to have we just don't have a 30% increase in economic activity.
That is a very large increase, and so I reached out to the county today. Unfortunately, they were out, and I asked for the sales tax breakdown. What my understanding and the way I answered the question, municipalities do receive the online tax. So if you're within Franklin, it's Franklin. There are areas that are not incorporated, and in that case, if the company reports it, it could be reported to the county. We don't necessarily see the breakdown of the different taxes coming in. We get our allocation of total, and so that's now what I've asked for, is to see what that breakdown is. So are there funds coming in to the county through sales tax that's paid online? Possibly, yes. I do not know what that amount is.
So if I order something online, you saying that the city of Brentwood gets its share, but you don't think we get ours?
Not necessarily. It depends on how the company reports it.
If I may, Ms. Farmer, I think another piece of that is, if the sales tax is collected and sent to the state, each county and LEA then receives a portion
Portion of that.
the amount reported to the state. So as we understand it, there is a portion of it that may not actually go to the county if it was that portion designated locally before it went to the state. That's my basic understanding of it, that there is one potential opportunity for a fraction of that to go back to the counties that currently isn't, but largely because if for the state collections, all the counties do receive that designated county portion.
Well, if you can find out definitively, I know we've talked about this, I know Eric's brought it up a couple of times, and I don't know that we've ever come to a really solid understanding of that. I know I've talked to city manager, and he thinks it's being reported correctly. Of course, according to you, he's getting all of his money, but I can't fathom it may be true that we're not getting paid on some of it, but there's no way we had a 30% increase and it's not. And if I understand correctly, we're 2 years into the internet sales tax allocation, right, where we're getting that allocated at the local level, and they're charging it. And so do you think the big increase is a function of this just because it was in place last year, but were there just not enough people that were participating and remitting it, and now we're just getting more to full compliance? Because I know we're not growing 30%, so this is the only change that's been made that would we're probably growing, maybe even double digits, but 7-8% is what we budgeted. So, but when we budgeted, were we going based on historical, or we weren't anticipating this?
That's correct. We were not anticipating that kind of jump. And so we did, historically, if you went back 5 or 6 years, it's fluctuated anywhere from 5 to 8% growth. And so we went ahead and used 8% of the higher end when we did the estimates, but we did not anticipate this. A couple of other factors have been, with COVID, people did not travel as much, so they are spending here more. Also, prices of things are going up, therefore sales tax is going up. So I think there's a few factors going into it, and we just need.
And it's this reason. So you, and I know you're not doing this alone. You're talking to people, but you feel very certain. I'm not going to say 100%, but certain enough to put your money where your mouth is, right, and here to say that you don't think that that you understand, you feel like that this is sustainable from a sales tax revenue standpoint, and it's not just going to drop off and leave us in a bad situation.
I feel confident enough to say to you, even if it did drop off and things leveled back out, we will be fine with the existing funds we've already taken in. If I ran the rest 7 more periods with just 7% of an increase in sales tax, which is in line with what's been in the past years, we would still be able to fund what we needed to fund
For
this year and making headway on next year.
So, well, that's where I want to understand your certainty, because we're not finished with. I know we're not finished with this year's budget, and you can there's only so much you can do to it, but we don't know what next year's budget's gonna look like yet, and so just give me comfort that help me understand why you feel so comfortable that there's that, because we always start out with that gap between what our ending fund balance needs to be, or what our beginning fund balance needs to be, and where we are based on our budget and the revenues that we're willing to project, or that the county's willing to project for us. And they're really conservative on that over time. So why in this case are we so bullish on revenue growth?
In this case, we already have money in hand. The funding that we are requesting tonight is money we have in hand on the additional sales tax we've already taken in. That's why I feel so confident in it. We've already got it. It's not a question of if in those particular numbers. We have it. Going forward, even with a 7% versus a 20 to 30% growth, we will have enough funding in order to cover this year and what the beginnings of next year. We don't know next year. As I mentioned to you all, we are in the very early stages of processing what the budget's going to look like for next year. In going back 10 years after you asked the question, we've never been below 6% is the low end, 5.85% growth in the last 10 years. If we have an additional 6% growth going forward, we would still have enough based on normal growth within the county in other areas, sales tax, property tax. We don't know what BEP is going to do yet, but we do know that we've had growth, so therefore that will be an increase there. All of those contribute to being confident to tell you this is a adjustment we can make at this point and can financially handle.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate I'm sorry for belaboring, but I like to, everybody who knows that I like to understand how the numbers work.
No, there's some wisdom in us discussing this. I was about to share my nutshell view of how I processed it, but I think if that answers the question, I think that's sufficient.
I'll move on to the other questions on the floor. Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Galbraith, for asking some of those questions, too, because this is, as you said, Mr. Golden, unprecedented. And one of the things that I am really happy about is the relationship that you have with the county mayor and the county commissioners to be able to have that discussion in response to a pretty pronounced economic situation that has a real deleterious effect potentially on our ability to staff and provide quality services to our students. So this is really impressive how kind of quickly and responsive it is to those market conditions. And I think that it's worth reiterating too that no one is saying that this is the end all be all. This is the first step, but it's a significant one. So I appreciate that. And as well as your communication to the board, kind of getting this information out to us as soon as possible, answering a lot of the questions. Thank you, Rachel, as well, for, I know, answering a lot of questions about this one and the next resolution, walking through the fund balance impact. One of the questions that I had was what else might hit the fund balance. You know, every year we have some reconciliations and some things that get moved around, and I had pretty good assurance from Rachel that is not a concern going forward, that we're going to have enough for what's anticipated, what's historically been asked for from that financial resource. So I feel comfortable there. The sales tax question has come up enough, especially for the online questions. I think it'd be worth adding that maybe to a frequently asked questions or something to our very good and transparent financial portion of the website. But once we get that kind of nailed down and can have some scenarios, I think it'd be good to sort of exactly see how that plays out so that we can get a comfort level with that going forward, because I think it's only to be more significant. So appreciate the questions on that have been asked. But
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you for the effort on this, and I'm very pleased to support it.
Mr. Cash?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Golden, Mr. Miller said something about retention. Okay, that's a big word these days. I understand that, and I know the hourly folks are just going to enjoy this $1 an hour because I think they're still actually below what they should be making. Could we get an overview of, I think it was mentioned 579 teachers have left, somewhere in the neighborhood of that?
Yeah, I am going to ask Ms. Hall to answer that. We actually have more teachers working for us this year than we did last year. So we have netted ahead. Ms. Hall can give you some detail, but I want to especially mention that what we have noticed more than anything is the pool of teacher candidates has substantially shrunk over the last few years, and I'm talking the last 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And we currently, as of last week, had 71 open teacher positions. And so, Ms. Hall, if you would share some of the detail that Mr. Cash asked about.
Yeah, maybe just retirements and folks that are just looking for a different profession.
Gotcha.
You're ready.
Am I on? Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cash. And I think probably what you're recalling is that number. We had about 560 that have teachers that we hired between January 1st and December 31st. And then we have also had an increased number of separations as well. We've had 529 separations from January of last year until December of this year. And that's an increase from 2019 when we had about 380 that separated. So we have seen a upward trend, but also last year during COVID, our separations were really down. A lot of people stayed during COVID, which, you know, seems kind of different maybe than what you would think, but I think a lot of people, you know, they wanted that job security, and we did see less separations at the time. But the information we've gathered from those who are leaving, it's a challenging climate to be a teacher right now, and I think that's weighed a lot on our teachers and our other staff. We do know that salary is a factor. We are significantly below salaries for teachers in this county. We're about 7% below Rutherford County and about 15% below Metro. So we still do kind of run behind with salaries, and we've had a lot of changes for that, for salary reasons, and then just a lot of things that are, you know, beyond our control, like individuals moving out of the area, because we do have a lot of in and out. But various types of things, but the ones that we are seeing recurring are change of career. The teacher climate is difficult, it's very challenging, and then also some salary issues related to being a teacher here.
And if I may mention one specific item and then speak more generally, you heard this in public comment, and it's true. It's more than salary. Salary is incredibly important. People work, you know, to earn a living, but we actually don't charge individuals for their health insurance premium. When someone works for us full time, that does not get taken out of their paycheck for the monthly premiums, whereas our neighbor to the north actually does. And so there is a mitigation of that expense compared to some of our neighbors. But generally speaking, our teachers' salary is less than many of our neighbors. One experience that we've seen over the years with that is very often when we increase, our neighbors will increase as well. So it is that constant battle. One focus point that we have, that we continue to emphasize, that we continue to work on, and we know we need to continue to work on, is to provide a good living salary for our professionals. And when the market changes quickly, there's some reasonableness to making a quick change to let folks know we're responsive. Final thing I want to mention generally, we've made a commitment to you at the February work session to share some details with a presentation from our human resources folks with some really good data and what we've seen over the last few years and some projections for the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for, I really thank you for recognizing that the teaching atmosphere and situation could have a lot to do with this. Just one more question. I was wondering if there's anything special you're trying to do to, you know, keep people in these jobs, because it's very important, and retain some of those that retired early.
So thank you for that. Like so many other things, there's no one pure solution. I've talked to some of our folks about hearing from an airline professional who actually used the phrase, "the pizza parties aren't working anymore," because it's been so difficult in that industry, largely because of the civility with what they've had to work through. We've had some of that as well. So one main focus point of many that we've talked about as a leadership team is when we have a chance to treat our professionals like professionals and to make it easier on them, do it. And so on some of those days when we've had a teacher-only day, we've found ways to accommodate their, their needs and make things simpler for them. We've shifted to the extent it works for families to allow for remote parent-teacher conferences, as an example, when we had that parent-teacher conference day. If our professionals can do things in a way that our professionals have historically done, we try to make that change. And I'll tell you, I mean, it takes a lot of effort. Sometimes we say no on the front end, then we later on figure out we can do it. So that's part of it. The 3% proposed raise in the middle of a school year is an example of that. Our tradition with our teachers is percentage raises, and we were able to talk to our teacher leaders about that and make it a clean, simple raise that's easy to explain, rather than an hourly rate, as an example, because our teachers are on salary. We've talked in more general terms about being nice. We brought that back. Our PTOs have made it a point to encourage our teachers and thank them. And so it really is a team effort. I actually have a meeting scheduled next week with the board of Williamson Inc. To share with them where we are and brainstorm with them over finding ways in the community to encourage our teachers.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. Thank you, Ms. Hall, for your report.
Mr. Brown? Josh, hold on just a second, please. Try again.
I'll add my support for this. I really appreciate you bringing this forward, Jason, and recognizing this need. Three things I've got, and one of them was what you just mentioned about the health care premium, health insurance premiums. I wasn't aware of that, which is actually interesting. Do we know what percentage that represents in terms of benefit to the employee? In other words, if that were taken out, how much less would that be in their check?
I can tell you how much we pay per full-time equivalent back to the counties, $10,700 per full-time equivalent employee to the county for health insurance premiums.
So if obviously not all of that would be coming out of the employee's check, so what percentage of that would be their portion if they were paying a premium?
So, Ms. Farmer, could you answer that?
That does not come out of that check. That's our portion that matches, and it depends on what they select, if it's single coverage versus family coverage, so that varies a good bit, actually.
But is it fair to say that maybe 1 or 2% of their salary would be, their salary would be reduced by 1 or 2% if they were paying their premiums?
If they were to pay the full $10,000.
If they were paying their what would be the traditional employee portion?
In essence, Mr. Brown, a comparable market amount for health insurance coverage.
Let's just say that a teacher would pay $200 per paycheck for their portion of the premium, not counting what the county would be paying.
Ms. Farmer, Ms. Hall, I don't know enough about the market to
1%, 2% maybe?
I don't want to just totally answer off the cuff, but I think it would be much higher than that.
Okay.
I would think it would be 10 to 15%.
The reason I bring it up is just because I don't know how much we talk about that as a factor in the salary discussion. I mean, I'm 100% supportive of the salary increase, but I just think that's something we should be maybe saying more and talking more about, is that if neighboring counties are having to pay that, neighboring teachers are having to pay that and ours are not, that inures to their benefit by, sounds like a fairly significant percentage.
Thank you for that. Our employees do pay the premium for family coverage, but not individual.
Okay, that's important.
And I like your idea. I'm going to use the phraseology that many of us have heard, shout it from the rooftop.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll make sure we share some additional information and continue to talk about
Okay, thank you. The second thing is the fund balance. I know that I learned this last week, that we have to start the year with X amount, but we don't have to end the year with any certain amount. What are we projecting? I know we're saying we want to spend $4 million roughly on this out of fund balance. What are we projecting at the end of this fiscal year we will have in fund balance on a normal run rate, absent this $4 million?
Ms. Farmer, I don't, if you could mention that. And before you do, I'm going to give a preface. Every line item where we don't spend goes into that
Reverts to
fund
it.
balance, which
Yeah.
is one of the primary funding mechanisms for the next budget. So that fund balance will include unspent line items. And then it along with property tax, sales tax, and state funding will fund the next year.
Well, and you sort of went where I was going with the question about the fund balance carrying over, because where we end will sort of help us know where we're going in terms of the ability to cover this again in the future.
That's right. Ms.
fiscal year.
Farmer?
And Mr. Galbraith mentioned the gap that we look at when we look at the budget. And that gap is the difference between revenues and expenditures, what we're requesting, and fund balance is what fills the gap. We are currently running 20% higher than what we normally do. The last several years, we've been right between 12 and 13 million is our requirement to start the next year. And so we are over that currently, and we do not see any big expenditure coming that would reduce the fund balance further. I cannot tell you, and we will not know. It's a moving target because you could have a PO open tomorrow for $1 million that's going to affect the fund balance. And so that's why when we go and we begin to talk through the budget process, we continually talk about that gap and where we'll land, because we won't know until we get closer to the end.
So that's a segue to my third point, which is the fifth whereas clause in the resolution that's before us talks about the possibility of an additional pay increase in the next fiscal year based on projected revenue yet to be determined. So we're putting this in the resolution that we're previewing another salary increase. We're not saying what percentage, but we're putting it in there on the record that this is our intention, which again is a good thing. But it sounds like to me maybe what we're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there would be enough, you're projecting there would be enough in the fund balance that's remaining at the end of the year to cover the increase we're doing now plus an additional increase of a modest amount. Is that fair to say?
That's what we're currently projecting, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And growth, because we will need to cover whatever growth we have.
And not to mention what we potentially would get with BEP formula changes.
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Welch?
Thank you. So I went back and I found something from the TSBA conference, and this was in November of 2019. It was a slide that I thought was interesting. It was college freshmen declaring as education majors. It was based on national trend data. In 1975, 22% of college freshmen became education majors. In 2015, that had dropped by more than half. It was 10%. And in 2017, just 2 years later, it dropped by more than half again. It was just 4.6% in 2017. And of course, we've had some pretty hard years for our teachers since then. So I can't go into the numbers, details like Jay can. It makes my eyeballs swim and my brain hurt. But I do know that for our community and our kids, just having good teachers in the classroom is vitally important. I know from that conference back in 2019 that Tennessee as a state, we're a teacher importer. We do not produce enough teachers of our own. We have to go out to states like Ohio and others and convince them to come down. And then when we do convince them, we got to fight to keep them here. Mr. Golden, you mentioned, you didn't want to say who, so I won't, but you mentioned that some of our neighboring districts that may or may not be to the north of us are actively calling our teachers and offering them more money to jump ship, and frankly, that's been successful. And I know I can do something simple like just, I popped up Realtor.com and I looked for single-family homes here in Williamson County. There's a grand total of one house that's under $300,000 in the entire county. That's 1,000 square feet. And there's a grand total of 11 homes that are under 400,000 in the entire county. So you look at that and you just go, my goodness, how does a family of two teachers that aren't very long into their career afford to live in the community where they work and send their children to the system where they go to school? So this is an easy one to vote for. It'll pass with flying colors, obviously, but I think the important thing is this is a beginning, not an ending. We do need to continue to fight for it. I think Mr. Cash asked a great question: how can we also support our teachers and everything else? And I think as a board, things like this, but also to support them in what they do, and when challenges and attacks on them come up, that we as a board should be advocating very vociferously for the jobs they do, the capabilities, and standing behind them and supporting them as well. All of that are things that we can do as well, but first and foremost, the law of supply and demand, a competitive market, we've got to pay them more. It's very evident.
Thank you.
Board members, I don't see any other hands raised, so we can move to the vote on this general purpose school fund resolution for raises. Please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you. Our next item is the approval of a retention bonus for school psychologists. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the particular items where we are losing individual school psychologists to some of our neighbors is school psychologists, and it is such a significant challenge that we are asking you to approve a bonus in mid-year for that. We do have a number of retention bonuses for different positions. This is one where we've experienced this again in the middle of the year. Our intent is to, if you approve this, to give $2,500 now to our school psychologists and then $2,500 at the end of the year. We contemplated the possibility of doing it at the beginning of the year, and we determined that it was important for us to spend the money in this current budget year during the budget. Rather than it carry over. And we will be talking with the WCA about all those professional positions, and we may have some other bonuses that we include, after our discussions with them in preparation for next year. So do recommend approval. Certainly open any questions you may have.
We have a staff recommendation for approval. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Mitchell makes the motion to approve. Is there a second? Ms. Cleveland makes the second. Board members, is there any discussion on this item? I don't see any. Oh, there, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a hard time figuring out which button to push, apparently. So, Jason, this is a one-time payment, correct, or a one-time retention. Do we anticipate revisiting this before August or maybe even before summer, where a lot of times people decide to move and see what we need to do to make sure we don't all of a sudden have a flurry of exits after Memorial Day?
Short answer is yes, but long answer, which I always love to give, is we anticipate discussing this and other positions with the WCA, so that's definitely a possibility. From a budgeting perspective, you all will vote on our budget based on our schedule. I'm trying to remember, is it April? March? Thank you. Vote in March on our budget. The county commission has been asked by the auditors to actually pass their budgets and our budgets before the end of June. So before July 1, we should know on this and potentially some other pay issues.
So is this I don't believe this is a large funding item for our budget. I guess maybe at 54 positions, we're short 12, so you're looking at about a $300,000 item, I guess. Is this going to be a hiring incentive as well? So while this is retention, are we looking to also have a bonus if we hire anybody new?
If I may, Ms. Hall's getting ready to answer that, so I'll let Ms. Hall answer that.
Thank you. I just wanted to say we do have hard-to-fill incentives. So if we do have a new hire, there would be that hard-to-fill incentive for them.
And again, I'll reiterate that if we don't revisit this, if we feel like this is a valid tool to keep our school psychologist, if we don't revisit this for next year prior to the final payment, then you're at risk of losing people, or that tool, I guess, is gone for the next school year.
Well, thank you for that. You're right that every year, as long as there's a shortage of this particular profession, and there is a significant shortage for a number of reasons. Fewer coming out of school and the increased demand where every school system needs more than they used to. You're right about that. So that is one of those items on our priority list.
And last question, it's my understanding that we contract for positions when we can't fill it in-house, we actually contract out to third-party providers for these psychologists. Is the cost of our contract service significantly more than what we pay?
Common sense says yes. I'm getting a nod from Ms. Hall, yes. And I will tell you also, a large portion of what our school psychologists do is testing to help students and teachers determine the appropriate instruction for them. So I wanted to make sure that folks had a bit of a visual of what, a big chunk of what school psychologists do.
Ms. Cleveland?
Just a simple question. How many school psychologists do we have, and are all the positions filled?
We have 54 budgeted positions, and we are short 12.
Thank
you. Mr. Brown?
Thank you, and forgive me if this was said, but what is the average salary for this position currently?
We have not said, and I'm struggling to remember off the top of my head. Ms. Hall?
So we actually pay them off of the teacher salary schedule with a 5% differential that's over that. So they're paid the same as the teacher salary schedule plus 5%.
1.05 times the teacher's salary.
The average teacher salary is 55, so it would be 5% over that.
Given the difficulty of filling these positions, I mean, was there any thought given to a higher amount than 5,000?
At this stage, based on what we've heard from our neighbors, well, indirectly from our folks who are talking with our neighbors, that's about what the bonus that they're being offered. Now, the reality is the salary is somewhere $9,000 to $11,000 less. So ultimately, we determined that this is what we could do. Now, again, we're going to be talking to the WCEA about where we go from here with what budget money may be available for the coming year. Ms. Hall, anything else you'd like to add to that?
I just wonder, I'm not necessarily proposing this, but I just wonder if, given what you just said about how much lower their salaries are compared to competitors, doing enough that it brings their salary up to par, and maybe putting more on the back end instead of on the front end so that it serves to be more of an incentive to stay longer.
Part of our difficulty is there's some truth to so many positions in that context that we're paying less. And so what we are trying to do, at least in this example, is as much as we can have an immediate response. It's hard for me to speak broadly, so I'm going to speak anecdotally. What we hear from our folks is, boy, it's tough to say no to that much. I love what I'm doing here, and so what we're trying to do is find some amount that we can do to let them know that we really do want them.
I think about this, is the last thing I'll say about it. I think about this in the context of the discussion we had at a couple of work sessions ago, I think, about the increase in mental health referrals and the greater incidence of depression and anxiety and other mental health issues, and there just not being the resources to meet that. So not only do you have a market problem, but you've got a demand problem too on the patient side, if you will. And just something to consider. I'm not making a proposal, but I just put it out there maybe to think about.
Thank you for that. And we really have a team, who work on serving students, especially in that mental health needs arena. School psychologists, school counselors, our social workers who put our students in touch and our families in touch with private providers, special education providers. I mean, the scope of our team is pretty broad, and in so many of those positions, we're all facing those staffing challenges.
Board members, I don't see anyone else requesting discussion. Please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, board members. The next item is approval of opened and/or closed zone schools for the 2022-23 academic year, and this is an annual agenda item. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a new law that has added a lot of detail to the process we need to go through for open zone schools. You may recall that we did open zone schools years before any law passed, and the first law that was passed largely paralleled our board policy. This time it's different. The state law has restructured that, where we need to go back and look at how many seats are available and open zone for that. They have changed the structure from a first come, first serve under our process to a lottery system. And so the essence of this is we have a list of open zone seats that we determined complies with the law, but gives us, as best we can determine, projections for addressing growth, which the law still allows us to do. So that's the chart that's before you. Projected open seats for open zoning based on what the law allows us to do, including addressing growth in our high growth area. The portal for folks to make the request, if you approve tonight, will open February 1st, because as part of the new law, they actually require it to be posted for 2 weeks before it actually opens. You may recall that in the past that we have tended to post it the moment you finish the board meeting, because requests start coming in immediately. Again, it's not first come, first serve anymore. It's total. The portal is scheduled to end and close May 15th, which is your board policy. And in the event any of those fill up beyond the amount of seats available, then we are required to conduct a lottery for those seats, for those families to choose. This is substantially different, but again, the numbers that we recommend are based on what we project our school campuses can bear. I will tell you one other item, and we discussed this somewhat at the work session. How this goes this year may have a significant impact on potential changes we may recommend to our school board policy, because we have a lot of detail in our open zone policy that we've worked through based on families' needs over the course of years. But based on where we are, I do recommend approval. And if you have any particular questions about the law or the process, Ms. Osbrooks and Mr. Samuels are also available to answer any questions.
Board members, do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Welch makes the motion, Mr. Hall makes the second, and we already have speakers. Mr. Cash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just got a question for Mr. Golden or maybe Ms. Osbrook. What does a lottery look like?
Thank you. And I actually believe that Mr. Samuels may be the best to answer that, because we're working on that right now. We're actually checking with a couple of entities that have computer systems that can structure for that. Mr. Samuels?
Yes, sir. We don't have a lot of definition on that yet because, as Mr. Golden says, we are been talking to and interviewing different type of lottery opportunities, apps and things. So I don't have a lot of definition for you, but what we're trying to do is get something that would be quick, easy, transparent, and that's kind of where we're going with that.
And the idea, of course, is that if there, I'm going to use an example, if there's 50 seats available and 60 people have said they want it, then 50 will be randomly selected. And so our idea is choose a computer model that will allow for that.
And Mr. Cash, there is not a lot of specificity in the law. It just says that a lottery shall be conducted. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I personally do not feel that our current policies and rules on open zoning are suited to this new law. And I'm talking about the rules around grandfathering, rollover into the feeder program, into the feeder schools, the sibling as well, sibling rules as well. So I feel like we need to, further, we don't have a method for the lottery. So I really, I'll let Jay speak before I make a motion to defer this for a month, for us to revisit our policies and get our policies where we think they should be given this new paradigm of open zoning that the state has placed on us, and also make sure we've got a lottery defined that we've all been able to vet and think about before we actually post this up on February 1st. So as this is written, we're looking to put this up on a portal for February 1st, open the portal on February 1st, when we really, our policies have all been written for a much more narrow open zone approach that we have had over the last few years. So I'll I guess, give my time back, and then I would like to make sure I get recognized again before we go into vote.
Mr. Galbraith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Elliot's point, I know I'd mentioned deferral, and then the answer around why Jason's staff didn't recommend deferral. Help me understand this, because they said that they weren't going to. It was going to delay being able to start enrolling students and the certainty around that. And I guess that would only be true if it was clear that we weren't going to reach the limit. So if we were going to, is that the rationale there? Because if we reach the limit, then we can't touch anybody's schedule, right? But the limits are pretty high. Is that your?
Yes, one of the things that Ms. Nunley talked about was, and I'm going to use my language. In our experience, we usually get a flood of folks early, and then we get a flood at the end. And so the thinking that we've had is if there was such a small number that it was quite apparent there would not be a lottery for a particular school, that would allow Ms. Nunley's staff to process those requests. That gives some kind of finality for families. Everybody waiting till May 15th is a long time. And that's one item that I'm not sure that when this was discussed at the legislature was fully contemplated. So Ms. Nunley did ask for it to be now so that they could process some during that time. Another item related to that is staffing. But the reality is there will be some that we won't know. We anticipate there will be some we won't know for sure until May 15th.
So I guess my recommendation as it relates to to what Elliot's about to propose, would be I'd be in favor of delaying a month because we still got a big window. But if we didn't delay, I would actually be in favor of setting aside policy with the intention of reviewing this upon and knowing that we're going to review the policy well, Jason, what do you think your reaction would be if we pulled the May 15th deadline back to a month, say like to April 15th? Because now, like before, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure why it's open so long anyway. Like 90 days is a really long time. If at February 1, it would be open 2.5 months. If we pushed it back to March 1st, it'd still be open 45 days. And we could figure out, they have plenty of time to sign up. There's no rush to be first. Seems to be plenty, it seems to be a good compromise, because before we didn't have to wait until May. We could start working as soon as they came in. We just left them as long as possible.
My proverbial gut tells me I like that. One of the things we talked about as administrative staff is, let's see the impact of this in this 1-year window and make appropriate changes, because we determined that with whatever happens with the numbers we have, we could deal with 1 year. Another variable that isn't going to help us any is the state going to address this? Because I know TSBA has talked about it. We don't know if there's going to be any proposed legislation to address it. I do want to refer to Mr. Samuels and Ms. Osbrooks to give their opinion on both of those suggestions, since they've been mentioned. Either the possibility of deferring for a month, the impact of that, or the possibility of making some changes to the policy.
So if I can, as to making a change to the policy, the current law states that the open enrollment period has to be at least 30 days. So we are well beyond that with the May 15th. That is purely from our policy. So yes, that could be changed. The other piece I wanted to point out that Ms. Nunley talked about Thursday night is that our counselors are already working on schedules. So for our middle schools and our high schools especially, not that there's not a lot of scheduling with elementary, but our secondary schools, waiting that month is going to be very difficult. So I do, given the way that the law is currently written, legally, we definitely could make a change next month at policy. We had already decided Thursday night to put this on the policy agenda, and we could do one reading in February and back that up. It just has to be a total of 30 days.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you. So I guess mine's more of a procedural question, because there's a motion on the floor for the resolution. So would that motion have to be withdrawn in order to take up a motion to delay this a month?
No, sir. Mr. Mitchell has asked, and I think he's now requested to speak. If he does, in fact, make that motion to defer, then the board would vote on that. But if he chooses not to and goes with Mr. Galbraith's suggestion, then the board would just vote on the motion itself. Regardless of how y'all vote, the discussion on Thursday night was to bring this to policy. So regardless of the vote, 1.703 will be at the policy meeting in February.
But to be clear, are we determining with whatever we do that any change we make could be done in a way that positions us to be ready for the next school year, in spite of all the things you've just talked about, as far as preparation, scheduling, and any change we make would still allow us to be ready to do this and have it be effective in the next school year? I know last week at the work session, we talked about whatever change we would make would only be for the following school year, because things are already in motion for 22-23.
Mr. Samuels, if you would answer that question with respect to the logistical work of Ms. Nunley and her staff.
And
will we have time?
Mr. Samuels, excuse me, but we did not pick you back up because Mr. Golden had asked for Ms. Osbrooks' thoughts on this and your thoughts on this. So would you not only address that, but anything else that you might want to say about the work involved?
Well, first, a question that was asked earlier, what if we move the deadline up to, say, 15 April? Allison doesn't see any problem with that. Moving the timeline forward, though, has already been mentioned. The logistics of scheduling really comes into effect. Part of our challenge here is you also get into some of the new summer activities that we have. Allison does the buses for summer school. That's a late decision. So the workload issue is the sooner we can get started, the better, and the sooner we can put this one, to bed, so to speak, in terms of workload of staff, the better. Stretching it out on the far end is a worse, and Dr. Webb may be able to address the scheduling aspect of it much better than I can.
Well, and I will tell you also, we're going to have an all-hands-on-deck mentality on this because this is unusual, and we'll make sure we provide whatever help we need to our staff. To give you all a little bit of perspective, usually we have somewhere around 2,200 open zone students a year, in that range. Somewhere close to 5% of our total student population is attending out of zone. Of course, we don't know what this variable might do to affect it.
Dr. Webb, do you want to say anything?
I can just speak to the timeline. Thank you. We have students who are in the process of registering currently. Our counselors are going through the process of going over the registration packet. So the registration and selection of courses, all of that is beginning. Students typically have selected their courses and have met with their counselors, and all that's completed by spring break so that the scheduling process can begin. So that timeline and getting all that complete, especially with the uncertainty of not knowing which school you're going to be attending, certainly does cause some additional stress for students as they await that final decision.
And doesn't that also impact tryouts?
Potentially, yes. And so if it's a student who is going out for extracurriculars, or if it's a student who hasn't established an athletic record yet and is going out for athletics, as an example, knowing which school that they're going to be attending certainly is crucial to those families.
Madam Chair, just to follow up, if I might. So help me understand what a change to the policy, practically speaking, does to the situation in terms of making it better in light of the new law.
Well, it depends on what portions of the policy change. But if, for example, there are limits on the sibling clause, which allows siblings who are in that school with their older sibling to attend, might that influence a family's decision to not go? It could. If there was a change that required a student to reapply year after year, might that influence their decision? And if they end up in a lottery annually, it might. Now, from my perspective as superintendent, what I know is that we have done a lot of work over the years to try to promote continuity for students and families as much as we possibly could in this context. What we don't know with this year is how many new out-of-zone requests there will be over and above what we've traditionally gotten. And that's the unknown that is making so many folks nervous. Might there be a flood? We just don't know. So, my gut tells me if there are any recommended changes to the policy that affect decision-making of families, we need to grandfather in those who we've already committed to, number one. And then second, evaluate, is this good for a student? The timeline change, I actually like because it's simple and straightforward and it gives our folks time. In a strange kind of way, it actually helps families plan a little bit better too for some of those other items. So there may be some simple items that we can change, even while this process is going on, that could be a positive.
Maybe a question for Dana. Is there any mechanism by which we can amend that policy tonight on the floor to have it happen sooner?
I would not recommend that we do that tonight. I recommend that we take it to policy. We can by the February board meeting, make that change. Instead of going through 2 readings, there is a mechanism in policy to amend it faster, and we have done that. I think it would be appropriate under our policy to do that.
I'm thinking we're more than 30 days out from the next board meeting, so I'm wondering if, so I hear you on not suggesting or recommending that we do it. Do we have the ability to do it based on our policy that governs how the board operates, or based on sunshine? Do we have the ability to do that on the floor, or just tonight?
We've not given proper notice.
Okay.
So I would not
So
recommend that we do
it's a
that.
sunshine issue
It-
or a notice
notice.
issue?
Sure.
You might not be stating it the same way.
Sorry, Jay. There you go.
You might not be stating it correctly, but my suggestion was to set aside policy and make a change, which isn't making a change to policy. It's setting aside policy and setting this counter to policy, knowing that we're going to review it. That would be a way. That's how we don't change policy. We just ignore policy for the purposes of this vote. Like, that's how we would do it.
Correct.
Like,
And I did not
No,
understand that's what you wanted to do. So yes, if you wanted to make a motion to set aside policy, and right now no one has.
No, right.
You could set aside policy and then make a second motion that would change it.
Just a minute. Are you done,
Yes.
Mr. Galbraith? Okay. Next up, we have Mr. Wimberly and then me.
Skip Mr. He wants to be off the list now.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question. I think that, we did ask Ms. Nunnally at the meeting, at our work session on Thursday night, and it seemed to me that she responded, she being the person that will actually do this work and her team, that she was comfortable proceeding under the current policy and under the current parameters. So the thing that I think is still at play in my mind, I think that, to me, her input requires significant consideration. I think, to me, the thing that's still in play is, do we have some feasibility to move those deadlines? Mr. Welch.
Thank you. I had most of my questions answered. I wanted to see if we could do an expedited, wanted to ask that of Dana, so I appreciate that. We can do it in one reading. I guess I'll add, I'm very much opposed to this discussion of trying to amend policy on the fly. This was not a casually written policy. There's a lot of implications and things that it touches, a lot of trickle-down effects with this, and because we've been put in a precarious position by bad legislation, now we have to adjust. Doesn't mean that we should write bad policy as part of that adjustment. We can do it quickly. We can do it more quickly, I guess would be a better way to say that, but try to do it immediately is a bad idea. The other, along with that, and I just want to ask Mr. Golden, Dana brought up kind of the implications of the counselors, as long as you feel that they will have enough time. I know that summer and all that is their busy season, so to speak, trying to play the Tetris game of making all the schedules and the classes and everything fit in there. So if we do defer this to next month and adjust our policy at that time as well, are we giving them adequate notice and time and preparation to be able to put that in place, or are we putting them in a bad position?
It has the potential to be difficult and time-consuming, but I will say it always has had that potential based on when folks choose to register, even in that first-come, first-serve. What I know our staff can do is work on those families that are already out of zone, and that's largely what our counselors do. Where it could be difficult is for those families who are waiting to hear, did I get in or not? Especially, for example, an 8th grader moving up to 9th grade and wanting to go, wanting to go to a particular school and get involved. My gut tells me I like the idea of moving that deadline up, but as we sit here, to your point on the fly, this is such a complex policy. My belief is that we have the potential to bring that deadline in earlier at next month's meeting if we evaluate the impact of that and make a recommendation. As we sit here, I'm not comfortable making a recommendation that we change the policy at this moment, but we do have the potential, because this is such a long window of time, where we might be able to and still serve our families appropriately, but our team needs to talk about those changes before we make them.
So, following up on that, then, kind of a couple things. One, doing the policy on the fly, as far as I'm concerned, at least, that's not a feasible concept. I'm not willing to consider that. The cure is worse than the disease, I think, in that case. We also have an issue, though, that I think we do need to change the policy. I think Elliot is correct that it was never written with this, with these implications and these challenges in mind. So the rules of the game have completely changed in that fact. It sounds like there is some concern with the timeline that we have. We can move a little bit more expeditiously, which is good. But even then, the 30 days out is a little bit of a challenge. So what I want to throw out there and see is this something where we should have a special called meeting with a single agenda item on it in order to review and make adjustments to that policy only with this in mind? Because I do see that the changes that we could potentially make to that policy could affect the open enrollment numbers, not necessarily what's available, but whether parents choose to or not, given on what we choose to do and go forward with.
There's a 3.5-month window. My opinion as I sit here is I don't see a need for a special called meeting, but there may be some value depending on where we land on a one-vote policy change.
Okay. Thank you.
Or suspension of policy pending a second, to Mr. Galbraith's point.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of notes I've made as I've listened to my peers' comments. My preference would be that we get our policies in order before we approve the open zone timelines, and that would include both the list of schools, the creation of the portal, opening of the portal, and the closing of the portal. That parents need to know what the rules are before they go on and ask to move their students from their zone school to the non-zone school. I don't see a requirement for the portal to be open between February and April. I think that's our call. You could open it from February to March. You could open it from March to April. You're talking the way this thing's written is it's gonna close in May. So we're wanting to modify that to begin with before we vote on it at a minimum. So that whole timeline of how long the portal is open and when the portal closes is us to make that determination based upon when we get the policies done. And so I don't see that that's going to impact what scheduling is going on right now, because scheduling is going to take place regardless of whether they've gone into the portal or not. The counselors are going to determine and set forth what recommended classes the student will take next year, regardless of what school they go to. Now, what classes are set up and where and when they're actually getting their schedule, I believe, if I remember correctly, is pretty much a week or two before school opens, because then they they have an idea of what classes they're in, what their actual class rotation is. What they're scheduling right now is what classes the counselors are recommending the students take for the next semester, and reviewing where they are over their overall career. I'm at a point of the risk of changing schools, I guess, is inherent to the scheduling is where I'm going there. I will call out in my line of work, speed does not equal quality when you're trying to figure out a policy, or you're trying to determine a thoughtful process. So I won't support setting aside policy tonight to try to figure the policy out. And a couple of the, Mr. Brown, a couple of the rules that I would think we would want to discuss with this new paradigm of open zoning is, what are we going to do with the students that are already open zoned? Are they grandfathered, continue to be grandfathered for the duration of their career at that school, plus the siblings that are following along? Because that's one of the rules, is once you get open zone, you're there for the whole 5, 3, or 4 years, depending upon the school, and your sibling that's in the school with you gets that same accommodation. So are we going to carry that forward with this much larger set of open zones? And that's one of the things I think we want to look at. And again, are we doing it every year? Are we going to make people redetermine? And we, quite frankly, need to have the lottery defined before we throw this thing out, because for us to assume that we're not going to have to run at least one lottery for the 40 plus schools that we've got out here is probably a risky assumption. So anyway, that said, I move that we defer this item into February.
Okay. We have would you please restate your motion?
I move that we defer this agenda item to the February board meeting.
Is there a second? Mr. Welch seconds. Is there any discussion? Let me ask the speakers who are in line. Does your comment pertain to okay, Ms. Priya?
Yeah, my question pertains to both motions, I guess. Is there anything stopping us from, if we decide not to defer and take a vote on approving this, but maybe can we change the deadline right now? I just see the value of opening. I mean, if we have to wait 2 weeks to open the portal, and I think there's a lot of value in gathering that data of where we see a flood of enrollments right away, as if we open it and then have the deadline be like April 15th, can we then work on the policy and the details of it as that is opened? Or is that not fair to families to say, you're going to apply, but you don't necessarily know what the rules are going to be? I'm just trying to figure it out procedurally.
Well, I'm going to speak to the logic and philosophy of it, and Ms. Osbrooks may speak to the procedure of it. If a family, or when a family makes an out-of-zone request, and if they change their mind, we don't say, no, so sorry, you already decided this, you're stuck.
Right.
If they decide, you know what, I'm going to stay at my school, up until the point they actually move to their school. Now, if they ask in the middle of a year, there's a process they have to go through. So if there's a change, the families would need to be informed of that change and make that decision, is this still something I want to do? And y'all, one big issue with the policy, I want to make sure we honor the intent of the legislature as well, and not make so many changes that it becomes a practical no for a family. And so that's one of the reasons I want us to spend some time before we make any substantial policy changes. Might moving it up a month, from May 15th to April 15th with a set aside of the policy, that that strikes me just on the fly as being doable, but again, I'm very concerned about making any substantive changes to the policy. But again, Mr. Mitchell's motion is to defer for a month.
So I think I followed you, and if I did not, the February 1st, when we opened the portal, that was administratively the decision. That's typically when around the time that we have. What we've typically done is this year or this month vote, and as soon as the vote occurred on the open zone at midnight, the portal opened.
Okay.
So Ms. Nunley chose the February 1st date. That's not in policy, that's not in the law. So that could be moved.
The only part in the law is that you're required to wait 2 weeks or post it 2 weeks before opening the
14
portal.
days, that's right.
14 days.
And February 1st is 14 days after tonight.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
And then it must remain open for 30 days.
Okay.
So to Mr. Galbraith's earlier question, we can also move the May 15th date that is in policy. So we either need.
Oh, I see.
Do you see? So we need to somehow change policy, either rewrite policy, which I believe is what Mr. Golden and I would prefer, because there may be more than just the date, or someone could make a motion to set aside policy.
So if we were to approve the original motion tonight and open it February 1st, and it would be set to close May 15th, could we then look at it during the policy meeting next month and change that during the open window of enrollment?
Yes, ma'am, we could.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
So I guess my first question is, practically speaking, what would a delay, as Mr. Mitchell is suggesting, mean administratively? Because obviously you brought it tonight, asking for approval tonight.
That's right. It slows down the work for those that we know need the scheduling. So you've got the practical work of Ms. Nunley and her staff to make the changes, and then you have the work of the counselors. Now, if you all decide to do this, let me tell you what I intend to do administratively. I intend to have our staff start working on the existing out-of-zone students and start working under the understanding that we have a commitment to them already, and we'll start processing them. The difficulty will be in those who have not yet decided but might change their mind. So I will tell you, no matter what you decide tonight, we'll make it work. If you vote to defer it for a month, our staff is going to work on the existing out-of-zone students and their schedules. I will strongly recommend that you not go back on the commitment you made to those in years past and change that. So if we have a change, we've already made that commitment to those families. If you vote to do it now, that will allow our staff to start working on it. Because it's always a lot of work. It is a flurry of activity that really demands some early work because our counselors can get some classes set and then that later work. May 15th has historically been there as a courtesy to our families to help them make decisions as late as they possibly can because they're working with their children on what's best for them. So I hate making a quick change because we're trying to do all we can to help our families make as informed a decision as possible. I don't know if that answers your question fully.
It does, and I think based on what I've heard you say, we can proceed tonight. If we proceed tonight, it allows you all to get started and not delay that. It also gives us the room we need to wait until the policy committee meeting in February to make changes to policy and still not harm the process, the integrity of the process. So I would move to table the motion to delay or the motion to defer.
Would you rather not just vote up or down instead of tabling? I don't know.
Does the tabling motion require a majority or 2/3?
Tabling would.
So tabling of a
affirm it.
says you're going to be able to bring that motion, that deferral motion back up at a later date itself.
Ms. Osbrooks?
So you don't want to resolve.
But
So to answer your first question, majority.
Okay.
So I'd recommend we vote on Mr. Mitchell's instead of tabling a defer. I'm not.
Okay, fair enough. I'll withdraw.
Mr. Galbraith?
Thank you. I guess if we're going to make changes, and you're okay with changing the rules after I was hoping to set the end date earlier to help everybody. But if you're okay with, if you would rather leave it at May 15th and change the date if we change the policy, then I guess I'm okay with that. And if we're going to change the policy, I guess it all gets down to, Jason, you're gonna have to explain this to parents.
That's right.
It seems to be easier to explain to them if we just delay it and everybody's delayed, and we come forth and they're signing up under the rules that we know. But if we choose to go forward and we make a change, and they have time after the change to change their mind before they have to make a final decision, this is going to be a really confusing process for everybody. I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. So the only thing that we could do to make it really simple is to vote tonight to go with the policy and not make any changes until after this process, which I don't think I'm hearing. I think everybody wants to make changes effective with this new process immediately. So I still don't know where I stand on this one.
Well, it's a tough one. And so we had a lot of these discussions just in the last couple of weeks administratively, because it is tough. And so where we ultimately landed was there's a variable we don't know, and that's how many people will take this up. And so what we ultimately landed on was leave the process the same and make decisions based on the impact of what our families ultimately do. And we have this 1-year anomaly. That's ultimately where we landed because of all the difficulty that you all are discussing. Now, if you vote to defer it for a month based on those unknown variables that Mr. Mitchell has articulated well, I will tell you that if you vote yes on this, my understanding of your vote will be that those who already are out of zone can be served as if they're going to continue in their out of zone schools, and we can work on serving them if you vote yes. I know there's still a lot of discussion, so I'm not comfortable, Madam Chair, making a recommendation yet on Mr. Mitchell's motion. But again, that's why we landed where we landed with all the confusing detail that this brings with it.
There are 3 more speakers, and then you can make a recommendation after that. Ms. Cleveland?
Yes, I'm against deferring it, and for the exact reasons that Mr. Golden just stated. That's my feelings, is I believe we're getting the cart before the horse here. We don't even know what's going to happen. We're making a lot of assumptions that have not even happened to talk about changing policy. This may not even really impact us. We don't know. And like to Elliot's point previously, is you just don't want a knee-jerk reaction and change things when you don't have anything, you know what you're going to change. And I don't believe in changing policy based on just assumptions. And I really believe you can, if we pass it tonight, as the law requires us to, we have to do this, wait and see. And if it does affect our policy, if we do seem overwhelmed by the grandfathering in and everything else, then we can make the changes. But we're making way too many assumptions to decide to change a policy. So therefore, I don't believe it should be deferred.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. Mr. Wimberly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I was going to ask what staff recommendation is. And have we reached that point now?
We have one more speaker after you, Mr. Wimberly.
Okay, thank you. I can wait.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned that the only result of deferring this a month would be to open a can of worms and potential anxiety among the 2,200 impacted families. This is just, there's so much involved in this policy that I would hate to entertain any more changes than what we're already dealing with here. I think we're kind of overcomplicating this. We've had a couple more variables introduced, but the solution that's been presented is completely compatible and in compliance with our policy from what I understand. Even changing the May 15th deadline, I think, would do a potential disservice to people who are moving to the community, people who have known that May 15th deadline from years past. Not everybody watches a 3-hour board meeting to pick up on the nuances that you just explained, Jason, about how this would be understood as we proceed. So I'm in favor of passing this as is tonight without adding any potential changes that could cause confusion with this policy. But I do think it'll be worth addressing. But I also know that there are a lot of people who have counted on this policy maintaining some consistency, and really it's important to give them that reassurance tonight, I think, and in the months ahead with this, that anything we look at changing with this, we really need to tread lightly on.
Thank you. That was our last speaker for discussion. Mr. Golden, would you like to give a staff recommendation regarding the deferral?
I do not recommend deferral.
Okay. Board members, the motion on the floor is to defer this action to vote on the open and closed zone schools for 2022-23. So this is the motion to defer. Please vote yes to defer, no to not defer. Is that correct? Mr. Wimberly?
No.
Your vote is 1 yes, 9 no.
Thank you, board members. And now we're back to the original motion. Approval of open and/or closed zone schools for the 2022-2023 academic year. Mr. Mitchell.
So I'll make a point here that this open zoning at a high school level is going to create some opportunities for the sports teams on the schools that have 30 to 80 or so open spots versus the schools that do not. So you're going to open a portal. Again, that's, will of the board is what it is. But for us to not sit back and think through what we're doing here by opening up all of these schools with our current policies is going to create, there's going to be a lot of nuances and a lot of caveats that we have not identified at this point. We haven't previously had to worry about, quite frankly. So.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mitchell. The numbers, generally speaking, are higher than they've traditionally been. We've had an obligation under the law to open zone schools where there is capacity. And so there are some schools that just haven't been open if there's no capacity. We've maintained that. But you're right, there's that potential that somebody could choose, I want to be on blank team or I want to participate in blank band, and therefore I'm going to that school. You're right that there is that possibility. Now, if I may, Dr. Webb, correct me if I'm wrong. The way it's hard to talk about TSSAA rules because they're complex. If there's a change in the midst of a student's high school career, that requires a year of no participation. So this has a bigger potential to affect an 8th grader, for example, moving up to high school. Did I articulate that appropriately?
Thank you, Mr. Golden. You are correct. So if a student has already established an athletic record, they transfer schools sitting out a year, or a bona fide change of residency is the path to eligibility. For a student who has not established an athletic record, such as a rising 9th grader, there is no requirement from TSSAA to sit out a year.
Mr. Brown?
Did I understand correctly from an earlier discussion that there are certain things, including the opening date of the portal, that can be done and decided administratively that are not subject to our vote tonight?
We cannot open the portal until 14 days after the board vote.
Okay.
So that's why we chose February 1st as the recommended date, because it's 14 days after this vote. And then, Ms. Osbrooks, if I'm not mistaken, there's a window of time where the portal has to be open, and under our policy, the portal would actually be open longer than the state requirement. Is it 30 days?
That's correct. It's 30 days.
30 days.
So you can't, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So yes, to answer your question, there are some things that are administratively. What y'all are voting on this evening is the attachment with the open and closed zone schools and those
And the
numbers.
associated with it. So you can't open it until 14 days after this vote, but you don't have to open it 14 days after the vote. You could open it later if you chose to, based on things you might encounter when you start to go into the process.
That's correct.
So that might address part of what your concern is, Elliot, that if the staff starts getting into this, we're authorizing you to start the process now, and you get into it and you realize there are things that require you to delay the opening of the portal for whatever reason, you have the authority to do that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Welch?
Councilman request to speak. Let's vote.
Thank you. So we are back. Oh, sorry, Jay. Go ahead.
Just to follow up on that, so I guess it depends, Dana, does it depend on what the motion is actually? I mean, what's the actual motion on the floor? If we're saying that we're going to approve these open zone schools and open the transfer portal on February 1st, then they don't have any discretion.
Right. You're correct. So the motion, the annual agenda item is approval of open and or closed zone schools for the 2022-2023 school year. There is nothing that in the motion deals with when the portal would open. We have announced that, though, so that board members would know. But the motion on the floor is for approval of the open or closed zone schools for next school year.
Okay, so I would say that we should, that if we vote for this without modifying language, giving flexibility to the superintendent, I would propose that if we vote for this as is, then we do it as is, and if we change anything later because of policy, then whether it's the end date or what happens to an open zone student after they enroll from a grandfathering perspective, like all those things we might end up changing in policy. But I would just recommend this not to push back the opening of the portal if we're voting tonight, because that's 2 weeks. Like, I don't even know what could we possibly find in the next 2 weeks, because nobody's going to sign up. What could we possibly find out in the next 2 weeks that could say, well, no, let's move it back to February 15th or March 1st? Does that make sense?
Yes, to your point, what I think that we may know when we come to policy is, and if not at policy, at the work session, we may know some things that we don't sitting here today as we talk about Because remember, we'll talk about this policy at the policy meeting at work session, both before you would vote at the board meeting if we, if y'all as a board want to make those changes.
Right, but that's after the February, that's after we
Correct.
would
It'll
vote.
be-
Like, so Jason, is there anything that could come up between now and February 1st that would cause you to push back the opening of the portal? Like, I just can't.
I can't
think of
imagine
anything.
one,
Okay.
to your point.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
So point of order real quick. We have 3 items on the agenda, 3 documents attached to this agenda item. It's a memo from the administration to us that speak on the last paragraph that say upon the approval, and there are certain dates assigned based upon our approval on that memo. The vote is strictly on the list of what I'm hearing you say, that the vote is strictly on the list of schools, the numerics associated with that list, not the details of the memo that is accompanying this agenda.
That is correct. What Ms. Garrett read was approval of open and/or closed zone schools for 2022, 2023, and that was the motion that was made.
I see no additional questions. So again, this agenda item is approval of opened and or closed zones for the 2022-23 academic year. Mr. Golden, is there a staff recommendation?
I do recommend approval.
Board members, please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, Board. Our next item is approval of the Charter School Review Committee for 2022. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Apria, Mr. Cash, seconds. Board members, is there any discussion? And Mr. Golden, I didn't ask you to say anything about that, so let me wind myself back a little bit.
Well, we varied it either before or after the motion, so I think we're okay. Madam Chair, this is the proposed committee that will review charter school applications. The policy actually calls for this to be done annually. It actually mentions December, and we didn't have a December meeting. We have been notified by 2 different entities that they intend to submit charter school applications next month, which is actually their deadline. And so do recommend approval of this committee in anticipation of that possibility.
Okay. I believe we have the motion in a second. Any questions, Mr. Brown?
Can you, briefly preview the process of after the committee meets and reviews the applications, then what happens?
So there is a detailed analysis of the scope of their plan, in essence, what it takes to run a school, and determination, and I'm going to use vernacular, do they have their ducks in a row for all elements of running a school? That's the basics of it. There's a template with a grid structure for the committee members to evaluate their application. Ms. Osbrooks, if you would share some detail related to that. I do know that the law has changed 2 or 3 times over the past 4 or 5 years with respect to that detail. When the LEA committee will make a recommendation, and then Ms. Osbrooks, if you will take it from there.
Sure. So there is, the Tennessee Department of Education has created a scoring rubric. Last year's was approximately 37 pages. Each member will score. There's different sections: budget, operations, human resources, academics, curriculum. They will fill out, the charter school will fill out that application, and then each member of the review team will score that rubric. Then that rubric will be tallied up, those scores, and then the review team will, after they've made a evaluation, they will make a recommendation to this Williamson County School Board to grant the application for the charter school, to deny it, or it could be denied with some changes. So if the application is approved by the Williamson County School Board, then we enter into a contract for, I believe, 10 years with the charter school. And if it is denied, then the charter school has an opportunity, we would provide them with the reasons for denial. And then the charter school would have an opportunity to submit a updated application, and then it would be back before this board again to vote to approve or not approve. And then the final piece, if it was not approved again, they could appeal the denial of the application to the Tennessee Charter School Commission. And that's a commission that was appointed by Governor Lee last year. So there is, Mr. Brown, we do have board policy 1.901 that is charter school applications that sets out some of that process, and much of it is also in state law.
And the constitution of the committee, is that driven by policy also, or is that subject to the superintendent's recommendation or board chair recommendation?
It is subject to the superintendent's recommendation. We did in December receive letters of intent from 2 charter schools, so staff was chosen. I will tell you there's broad categories, I should say, in state law, such as community members, but it is not as specific as, say, our request for reconsideration policy. So they're in all of the statutory requirements. Community members are part of this slate, as well as members of staff with expertise in certain areas, budget, operations, curriculum.
And I can assume that based on everything you said, that the process involves that this wouldn't be an approval for the coming school year. It would be for a future school year.
That's correct. So I believe the application is for the 2023-24 school year. So yes, it generally, the applications will have a 0 year where they're getting everything together, because in essence, they are creating a school from, the ground up. And then there's a 1 year, 2 year. So yes.
Okay, final question. The committee makes a recommendation to this board to approve or deny, recommending an approval or denial. If the recommendation is denial, does the board have the ability to overrule that recommendation and approve it?
Yes.
Okay.
It is truly a recommendation. So this body at that level would make that determination.
Could then affirmatively vote to approve the school if even if the committee recommended against it?
Correct.
Okay.
I would obviously want there to be reasons why,
Sure.
But yes, it is a recommendation under the law. You are not obligated as a body to agree with their recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, Madam Chair, I want to read one sentence out of the policy about the makeup of the committee. The team shall be comprised of members of the administrative staff of the district, community members, and a member of the board with relevant educational, organizational, financial, and legal experience. That's the description.
I don't see any other board members with discussion items. So board members, please cast your vote for the approval of the Charter School Review Committee. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, board members. Next item is approval of the TSBA legislative agenda. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you recall from the board work session, we have proposed to you approval of certain items in the TSBA legislative agenda. The TSBA membership voted at their annual meeting, and we have some particular recommendations for some of those items they voted on that are relevant to us. The proposed resolutions we're asking you to approve actually exactly reflect the TSBA resolution language with Williamson County Board of Education plugged in. at the appropriate locations. Do recommend approval of these.
Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Cleveland makes the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Brown makes the motion. Board members, any discussion? I see no one requesting discussions. Please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly.
Yes.
We do have one member who stepped out of the room. Ms. Osbrooks, proceed.
Just need,
Your vote is 9 yes, 0 no.
Thank you. Our next item is approval of the COVID-19 ADA Disability Accommodation Protocol. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question has come up about granting Americans with Disabilities Act accommodations based on individual needs of students. As a result of that, our attorneys have prepared a draft protocol that gives me the authority to accommodate students' disabilities within that act. That's the best description I can give, and I do want to invite Ms. Osbrooks if she has any additional details to share with respect to that. If there's anything else you can share, Ms. Osbrooks, certainly.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Golden. So this would be with accommodations for COVID-19. These would be on a case-by-case basis. After we would receive a request under the Americans with Disabilities Act, our administration would have an interactive process with the requester, just like we do with other ADA accommodations. And there are some examples that could be a piece of the accommodation.
Okay. Board members, do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Mitchell makes the motion. Board members, a second? Ms. Apria makes the second. Any discussion? Mr. Galbraith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important to talk about why we're doing this, and I guess I just want you guys on the board to understand. I think I'm in favor of this, but I think we're faced with some decisions based on, and we're reacting in no small part based on how the federal judges have kind of decided, made some rulings that impact us, and to me, this is an effort to limit the potential impact of that, to provide accommodations to students as they come about at a school level and not a district level, and then even down to the classroom level. And so I think it's really dangerous precedent that I don't think we're setting it. I think we're responding to it. But the precedent that you can, and I don't know of any other situation from accommodations perspective. I know we've accommodated peanut allergies and perfume allergies by requiring people not to do certain things that are harmful in the presence of others. I don't know of any others where we're requiring an affirmative action on the part of other people to as a reasonable accommodation. But that's kind of where we are, and that's what we're being told is the case in terms of orders from several judges that seem to all agree. And so this is an effort I do like the way that we're helping give some flexibility. We're putting a timeline of review. We're laying out all the different, as many different options as possible, so that requiring people, and even which, the voluntary masking, let's see how many people, given the opportunity, would voluntarily do that if push comes to shove. But there's a list of 8 or 9 things here that we could get to before, and the last resort is to obviously require the smallest number of people possible to mask. And I just want to make sure that it's clear, and that the existing any existing exemptions would apply, and in the case that a class would be required to wear a mask. Correct?
Yes, you are correct. That is included on the second page of this document, that any where required masking is implemented as a reasonable accommodation, existing medical and religious exemptions must be recognized.
Thank you.
Ms. Apria?
I just wanted to make a quick response to what Jay just said about doing this to accommodate a judge. I really want to point out that this is an ADA rule, a federal law, that we accommodate students with disabilities in whatever way we can. And so we're doing this to accommodate our kids and keep those who need this protection safe.
Mr. Galbraith?
Completely agree. And I did not mean to say that we're accommodating a judge. I think we're responding to it's not case law necessarily, but it comes with the impact of case law, if I'm understanding correctly. Multiple judges have made the are of the same opinion that that universal masking is a reasonable accommodation, and regardless of whether I think that or not, that's the law of the land that we're under today. And so this is to me, so I'm just recognizing the fact that exists today in the legal landscape. But I do want to point out something that somebody told me earlier today with respect to their IEP kids, and that is, we're equally responsible to provide accommodations to those students, like the deaf students and the like, who where universal masking is a completely isolating experience for a deaf student. They used to be able to at least read lips and understand what people are saying based on there, and now it's like the whole world is silent because they can't understand anything. And I can empathize very much so, but I have friends who've been dealt this situation. So while we're being told that we have to make this accommodation, we're limited. So I don't know what this is why we need this decision to be made at a very hyper-specific local level, because if there's 2 kids in the classroom and one of them is demanding universal masking, the other one is deaf and is requesting that the teacher and or the other students not wear masks because for their participation, like now you've got these competing interests. And so hope that clarifies my position, but thank you.
I don't see any further discussion. Board members, please cast your votes. Mr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Your vote is 10 yes, 0 no.
Thank you, board members. I just want to thank you all for your due diligence on all the items on this agenda. I know these meetings require a lot of preparation, both preparing for the work session and for the board meetings. So thank you all very much, and this meeting is adjourned.